So then we put this face serum out on the market. The testimonials were just right off the bat, absolutely amazing. Within days, people were saying like, this is amazing. I have this one lady, she's an influencer and a distributor of ours. Our first phone call was kind of funny because she was like, Chris, I have to share with you. Her name's Sarah Banta. I have a face serum and skin lotion obsession. I actually have a credit card that my husband doesn't know about, so I can buy face serums and skin lotions. And your stuff, the original stuff, the oral stuff, is the best thing that I've ever put on my face. And we're like, well, that's amazing. You should try this. And then about the time we were coming out with the face serum, my director of research came to me and said, hey, I've got this molecule that's got, 30 years of skin and hair improvements, and it's peer-reviewed published research. We should look into it.
Are you navigating the choppy waters of perimenopause? You're not alone, and I've got something that might be your lifeline. Let me introduce my new product, Balance Mastery. This isn't just another supplement, it is a perimenopausal powerhouse. Balance Mastery is a medical-grade formula designed by me to support you through the transitional phase. Let's break down these powerful ingredients and how they work for perimenopause. DIM and chrysin are your dynamic duo for managing erratic estrogen levels that cause hot flashes and night sweats and mood swings. If you're feeling foggy, the flaxseed extract is rich in lignans that support cognitive function and help clear that perimenopausal brain fog. And ladies, if those night sweats are killing your sleep, the green tea extract and broccoli sprout compounds work together to help regulate body temperature. But that's not all. Milk thistle supports your liver, which is crucial for hormone metabolism during this time. The best part is it's 2 capsules a day, and you're giving your body the support it needs to navigate perimenopause with grace. It's made in an FDA USA inspected facility, and you're getting quality ingredients. All you've got to do is head over to metabolicblueprint.com/pod10, and that's metabolicblueprint.com/pod10 to get 10% off your first bottle. That's right, it's 10% off just to get started on your journey to a smoother perimenopause. Welcome back to Menopause Mastery. Today I'm talking to Chris Burres, and Chris and I actually met at an event called the Mindshare Leadership Summit back at the end of September, and we had such an awesome conversation about antioxidants, anti-aging, and the state of medicine. So today we're going to talk a lot about antioxidants, and one of the antioxidants you probably have never heard of, which is C60. So Chris Burres is the published author of Uncovering the Secrets to Longevity Health, both a summit and a podcast host, and a patent holder with a surprising twist. He's not just a visionary scientist, but he's also a master of comedy improv. So Chris and I are going to have some fun. Chris is the founder and chief scientist at MyVitalC, where he manufactures a Nobel Prize-winning molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental research in history, a full 90% extension of life. He is the intersection where science meets laughter, and his life's mission is to help us live longer, healthier, and happier, pain-free with science. So let's all jump in here. And what we're going to talk about today is, you heard it right, an antioxidant that can actually lead to a 90% increased lifespan. So we're going to talk all about the science and the research and probably make you laugh a few times at the same time. All right, Chris, so I actually made some assertions in my initial review of you and your experiences and where you've been, but I don't think I actually quite did you justice. But one of the things I mentioned was a little bit about the animal study and being able to extend an animal's life by 90%. We got some, tough shoes to put on today, I think, but we're going to get into talking about C60 and the technology and how it's used particularly for humans in longevity. But I first want you to explain, before we get into the technicals of that, how did you end up in the health and wellness world? Because you're a mechanical engineer, which most people wouldn't attach to health and wellness. I'd love for you to kind of give your background.
Sometimes it's interesting when you dig into my background a little bit, I can get the question, so you're a mechanical engineer, you've done comedy improv, you played semi-professional soccer. Clearly, you should have ended up in the health and wellness space. Like, this is just obvious. First, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share, whatever knowledge I have and the research that is near and dear to my heart with your audience. That research is related to carbon 60, which we really think of in terms of industrial applications, and then as we progress into a health product, ESS60. The way I ended up working with it, I always knew that I was going to be an entrepreneur. Actually, I've got a book, Live Longer and Better. It talks about why I wanted to be an entrepreneur and what did that look like? How did I map out my life? And as you know, as an entrepreneur, you can map out whatever you want. It's not the way it's going to go. And it didn't. I thought I was going to graduate from school with a very nice engineer salary, save money, invest in a company, and then run that company, or who even knows what that looks like. And that didn't happen that way. Because while I was still in school, I met my now business partner or current business partner. We've been business partners for 33 years. And we met in physics class, and he was actually working. We were both attending the University of Houston. Go Cougs. And he was working at the Texas Center for Superconductivity. And this is kind of a structure housed inside the University of Houston structure. And we used to call that facility Chu's Castle because Dr. Paul Chu, who is famous for in the superconductivity realm, really had that building built in the labs, and they were amazing. So my business partner, Robert, was working in a chromatography lab, separating a recently discovered collection of molecules and isolating them to their kind of individual components. And one of the targets was, of course, C60. And one day, Dr. Chu came in and said, hey, you guys are a couple of young kids. This material is selling for $6,000 a gram, which is knock your socks off. You should go start a business. And my business partner is from an entrepreneurial background. I think he did a back of the napkin calculation, which looked like $6,000 a gram. And off he was running. Like that was the only calculation. And he started building the equipment. I was studying mechanical engineering at the time, and they needed help with drawings. They needed help with, the process of manufacturing this molecule is really challenging. It actually involves local temperatures of the sun. So you can burn your retina, actually get a sunburn if the reaction shines on you. So you can imagine the amount of heat that we had to manage in this particular design. And so I was actually supposed to help them and then go away. There was another business partner. The other business partner, and Robert and I are still really good friends with Diego. He went away. He had like much more fun things to do in college. And Robert and I were just like, let's put our heads down and build a company. And so that's really how we started. We delivered our first quantity of products in 1991, and we've been off and running ever since.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about what C60 is, how it's applied both in, human consumption from an antioxidant standpoint, but how else it's applied in the world.
So what we're talking about, and if you're watching, I'm holding up a model. If you're listening, I know there's a podcast, just imagine a soccer ball where the lines on the soccer ball represent the bonds between the carbon atoms. So you have a spherical molecule of 60 carbon atoms. It's the first closed cage molecule ever discovered, and the scientists who discovered it, they actually discovered it here in Houston at Rice University. And the three scientists who discovered it won the Nobel Prize in 1996. So a short 11 years from discovery to being awarded the Nobel Prize. They were awarded the Nobel Prize for a couple of reasons. One, it's the first closed cage molecule, so that was a spectacular discovery. Two, this molecule performs as well or better than the current best material in almost every application, right? So it makes better inks, it makes better batteries, better tires, better photocells. It really is a phenomenal molecule. Now, we're not using it ubiquitously, like certainly I have hoped all of these years, because it's very expensive. It's extremely expensive to make. Kind of described that and why I was initially brought onto the project. Vaporizing graphite at local temperatures of the sun causes it to be extremely expensive. And then the kind of final thing, I think you're going to win the Nobel Prize when you actually add a symbol to the language of chemistry. So the at symbol, prior to this, and we call it for human consumption ESS60, prior to the discovery of the ESS60 molecule, didn't exist in chemistry. And, the at symbol, we're familiar with it in our email addresses. It now exists in chemistry. So if you see something which looks like lanthanum, La at C60, what that actually means is a lanthanum atom physically trapped inside of the molecule. So not covalently or ionically bonded to the exterior, but physically trapped inside of it. And it turns out that the cage is big enough for any atom on the periodic chart to fit inside of it. So for all these reasons, it's an amazing molecule. They won the Nobel Prize in 96. And it was kind of recently that it dawned on me this potential that we were manufacturing it and delivering it to research institutions starting in 1991, right? So a full 5 years before the Nobel Prize was awarded, the fact that we were delivering these macroscopic quantities is probably part of the reason they won the Nobel Prize, right? So it was already amazing, but they only really knew what to do with it and after we were able to help them get their hands on it. So we've been there from the beginning. The molecule is amazing. And then kind of the next phase is, often people get nervous when I say it makes amazing ink, batteries, tires, and photocells. Like, what part of that car battery should I be consuming on a daily basis? So yeah, it has a dramatic shift.
When you were saying like that cage-like structure and that you basically any atom within the periodic table can fit within it, is that, I know that it can basically exchange electrons and that's one of its, antioxidant properties, but is it also that caging of atoms as well?
So the short answer to that is no, right? Those, when you encapsulate, it's called an endahedral fullerene. When you produce this molecule, you actually produce a whole collection of molecules. Carbon-60 is the most abundant, carbon-70 is the next most abundant, then you have 76, 84, and actually carbon-60 is like a perfect sphere, carbon-70 is a little bit more like a rugby ball, 76 starts getting more spherical. So those are all called fullerenes in homage to a famous futurist, Buckminster Fuller. And then also we colloquially call this molecule, this ESS60 molecule, we'll call it a Bucky Ball because it's ball-shaped and it's, kind of, again, homage to Buckminster Fuller. So the fact that it can hold a molecule in it, an atom in it, is unique. But the fact how it works as potentially an antioxidant, how it works kind of in a lot of chemical equations is the fact that it can hold up to 6 negatively charged particles on the exterior of the cage. And I want to roll back, it's kind of fascinating. Early on, this happened in the 90s, right? And that's when the AIDS epidemic was really at its peak. And it turns out that the shape of this ESS60 molecule, it fits perfectly within one of the proteins of the AIDS virus, blocking it from replication. So there are patents, well, I think they were applied for. They applied for patents for this to be kind of an AIDS treatment because it would prevent the replication of the virus. That didn't proceed down that path, but there's a lot of amazing things can happen here. And then because it's a little far-fetched, extremely interesting, all of the chemistry that works on benzene works on this ESS60 molecule, right? Benzene, ubiquitous in our society. We don't have plastics without it. Most medicines have benzene as the base. Detergents, like we just don't have modern society without benzene. So we're really comfortable working with benzene. This molecule can do the same thing. Like the chemistry works on the exterior of this cage the same way the chemistry works on benzene. One of the thoughts was, what if we put a radioactive atom inside of this and then attach something to the exterior of this cage so that it can attach to, say, a cancer cell? So then we actually deliver a radioactive payload to a cancer cell. That's pretty fantastic, space age kind of technology or nanotechnology. Still not outside the realm of possibility, just extremely difficult to execute.
Wow. Well, okay. So you covered so much ground there. So let's talk specifically. So obviously it's, got these electrons. Let's talk about the antioxidant capacity specifically. Obviously, we're going to go into like the animal studies and what they showed. But to everybody kind of listening, why would you want to take C60? What value is it? Sounds cool.
Yeah, except for when you say inks, batteries, tires, and photocells, then I get a little nervous. The study that really shifted everything was published in 2012. And because the chemistry that works on benzene works on this, because you actually have the shape of benzene on the exterior of this soccer ball cage, they assumed this molecule would be toxic. So they actually put it in a toxicity study. In that study, they gave rats water, rats olive oil, and then rats olive oil with as much of this ESS60 molecule as you could dissolve. Instead of being toxic, the test subjects that they gave it to, in this case it was Wistar rats, lived 90% longer than the control group. So this, we said earlier, $6,000 a gram, that's a fantastic number, like almost fantasy number. A 90% extension of life sits in that same realm, right? The next best way to live longer is typically calorie restriction. If you reduce your calorie consumption by 30%, you can extend your life by 30%. And that's been shown in multiple animal models. It's kind of that understanding is what's driving a lot of the excitement about intermittent fasting. But you think about that, you restrict your calorie consumption by 30%. I call that the starve yourself 1/3 to death diet.
Yeah.
And nobody really wants to sign up for that diet. Maybe they need a new PR firm or they need something. But again, that's a 30% extension of life, not what we saw in this particular study. And that study needs to be replicated. And so I don't believe that it's a one-to-one mapping, but it is still a fantastic result. So it's been kind of my job as the chief scientist here at MyVitalC to try and figure out, okay, great, we've got this amazing result in this study, a 90% extension of life. We've got these amazing testimonials that keep coming in. And I'll be honest, for the first 18 months, I'm like, okay, I believe you, Dr. Betty, that whatever positive happened to you, like you're a human telling me, and I believe you. But as a scientist, I don't know what to do with it, right? Because we're kind of taught that anecdotes don't matter, like you're just supposed to pretend they don't matter. But at the same time, anecdotes drive the scientific process. Remember, the process is have a hypothesis, which, by the way, comes from anecdotal information, and then go out and prove it. Ironically, in our case, the hypothesis was that it was toxic, and then the rats actually lived 90% longer. So my job is to figure out, okay, what is the potential mechanism of action? Because that's what you're asking. That's kind of the first thing people ask. One of them is, and I've gone down like 3 paths, and I'll walk through these. Our most consistent testimonial is people take the product in the morning, they report mental focus and energy during the day, and then better sleep that night. And if you just improve your sleep, you know you're going to improve your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. I'm sure that's something you address in your clinic. Like, hey, good morning, welcome, and want to check, like, how is your sleep?
Yes.
So if we're just improving sleep, great, that can have these positive impacts. The next is if you think about the medical community lumps, it kind of puts aging as an oxidation and an inflammation process. In fact, there's even a word called inflammaging. We know from peer-reviewed published research that, there's actually an ad hoc study that shows the ESS60 molecule to be 172 times more powerful than vitamin Z. That's just a study out on the web. There is peer-reviewed published research that shows it to be 125 times more powerful than vitamin C. So we can put a big check mark next to antioxidant, and we'll actually come back to that because that role does, we think, some amazing things actually inside the mitochondria. That'll be the teaser, like, oh, I got to keep listening because we want to talk about the mitochondria. We want to talk about antioxidant capability inside there. So the next is anti-inflammatory. Now, the FDA sees a discussion about inflammation as a discussion about diseases, the diseases of aging, typically the diseases of inflammation. And so you can't make broad-based claims there. And I think that's the right approach. Like the reality is, this chronic inflammation, which causes the diseases of aging, Alzheimer's, arthritis, even cancers, like those are very interrelated. And so you need to be careful. What we can say is that our product addresses inflammation, at least when that inflammation is driven by exercise, right? Or these acute incidences. So we've all had a long walk or maybe a really tough workout and felt kind of inflamed that next day. And so we can say that our product addresses that. And then if you think about it, I like to just kind of wrap up with our product fits perfectly in an anti-inflammatory diet, right? Like this is the diet associated with the blue zone people. They tend to live longer. They tend to have reduced incidences of stroke. They tend to have reduced incidences of heart attacks. We actually fit in that diet perfectly. And I've been talking for a while, so I can talk about our boss theory, but I want to make sure you've got some time to jump in.
I think you said something that I just want to touch back on. If people are listening to this and they go, okay, what's the application where I can really use this? So everybody, the act of aging is inflammatory and oxidative, right? We're tarnishing and rusting all day long. The degree in which depends on your genetics, your lifestyle, all those other things. But I think people forget that exercise, while being a good stress, is massively oxidative, particularly cardio, right? Particularly cardio. And that, I get this all the time from athletes. They're like, no. I take really good care of myself. And I was like, I can guarantee that you're not getting enough antioxidant support. Hands down, because there's no upper limit, really. Let's talk about what that really probably needs to look like. And I want they've heard me say it, but I would like you to talk about why that's so important, particularly about the mechanism of C60, because it's unique. It's not the same as glutathione.
Yeah, it's very different. And I think one good thing is there are some studies that suggest, and I know people are like, oh, then I shouldn't take more. And that's not what you're saying. And I actually would agree with you. They probably need to take more. But if you do overload, if you do take too many antioxidants, you can actually dampen the hormetic response. So hormetic response, I go out and work out, I do some heavy weights, my muscles are damaged, and then the body rebuilds them bigger and stronger. That's the hormetic response that you do want. If you have too much antioxidants, you can actually dampen the hormetic response, which means you don't build as much muscle, you don't build as much strength. And so you got to be careful there. I'm really proud. Chris Gethin is a well-known influencer, bodybuilder, longevity expert. He gives talks at the conferences that we go to regularly, and he loves our product. And in fact, it was kind of a funny story. He came by our booth. He's like, hey, I'm going to talk about you tomorrow. And in my head, I was like, oh, you're going to talk about like anti-inflammatories, right? Or you're going to talk about antioxidants kind of in general. And no, his last slide, like there's our MyVitalC is on the last slide. And he's saying, this is one of those antioxidants that doesn't dampen the hormetic response, right? So that's pretty exciting. When we start thinking about what could we be doing, right? We call it the BOSS theory, so buffering oxidative stress system. We know from peer-reviewed published research that the molecule gets into the mitochondria, right? Real quick, mitochondria, your audience knows this, but powerhouse of every cell. Every cell has between 50 and 5,000 mitochondria in it, except blood cells, which don't have any, and neurons and brain cells, which have 2 million, because that's how much energy neurons and brain cells need over the top. So you've got this energy producing organelle inside of every cell. And just like most energy producing things, there are negative byproducts, right? Your car going down the road has exhaust. Your power plant has smoke coming out the smokestack. In the case of mitochondria, it produces reactive oxygen species. These are negatively charged particles. They're usually managed internal to the mitochondria by glutathione and melatonin. Melatonin is kind of interesting. I mentioned our most consistent testimonial is related to sleep. So there's kind of some sort of circular thing happening here. But we also understand that our bodies can get depleted. Different mitochondria in our bodies could get depleted of glutathione and melatonin. That's when those reactive oxygen species are left to, I kind of picture them as like bumper cars running around just damaging, rusting anything that they bump into. And that's where we think the ESS60 molecule comes in. We know from peer-reviewed published research it gets into the mitochondria. We know all the way from back in the 90s that it can hold up to 6 negatively charged particles on the exterior of the cage. And so when the glutathione and melatonin are depleted, this can hold on to them. I've got kind of a fun analogy. It's Mardi Gras. It's the end of Mardi Gras, and we're on Bourbon Street, and we've got these drunk reactant oxygen bumper cars running around doing damage. And the police, the glutathione and melatonin, come in and handcuff themselves to these reactive oxygen species and get them off of Bourbon Street. And when they get overwhelmed, what does the New Orleans Police Department do? They stick them in a paddy wagon, right? So this ESS60 molecule can hold up to 6 negatively charged particles so they don't do any damage. And then when that mitochondria can replenish the glutathione and the melatonin, they can handcuff themselves to them and again get them off of Bourbon Street. It's a unique mechanism, and it's the reason that we call this ESS60 molecule the BOSS, again, buffering oxidative stress system. So when we think about the one, why these rats might have lived twice as long, to why we might getting head to toe testimonials, and we are, and we'll probably talk about some of the testimonials that we get. If you can reduce the negative, it's interesting because it's not necessarily improving how the mitochondria functions per se. It's doing its ATP job. But when it gets overwhelmed, you're reducing the negative impact of that overwhelm. And, things like just stress can overwhelm your mitochondria. Certainly, long distance running can overwhelm your mitochondria. Whatever, sunlight can impact your mitochondria, and pollution. So there's all these things that are stressors on our body. And to have something, if you had a room full of doctors who are mitochondrial experts and you said, hey, would it be nice to have a free radical sponge inside the mitochondria? They would all raise their hand and go, yeah, that would be a really good thing. And that's what we think the ESS60 molecule is doing.
It's a great analogy of what's really happening there because, I think classically, especially in the nutrition world, people will say, well, gosh, I think I need glutathione, so I'm just going to take truckloads of that. Or maybe I do alpha lipoic acid, vitamin C, all these precursors, and acetylcysteine. And it's really that mechanism, like you said, of sort of handcuffing itself to C60 and the glutathione that you actually help sequester it till it can get used again, instead of just trying to, basically shove it in there and pray that it gets there.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think anything you can do to support your kind of the amount of glutathione in your mitochondria, yes, keep doing. Like, this is not a replacement for that, but this just says when you're overwhelmed, we've got this buffer that can help prevent the damage. And it's interesting, our most interesting test cases is a 2-time US ultra running champion.
Have you been feeling off? You know what? Your hormones might be out of whack. Take my quiz to discover your personalized hormone imbalance and get a free report with your results. Learn what's really going on with your hormones and start feeling like yourself again. Just visit the website quiz.hormoneshelp.com to take the hormone quiz now.
His name is Anthony Kunkel. He won a 50-mile race, a U.S. championship, and a 100K, which is 62 miles. So he does things I'll never do. I'm kind of not interested in doing, but he is super analytic. So he cycles on and off of things. He's figuring out where in his training block that he wants to use our products. And he absolutely loves our product. And what he says, I mean, if anybody's overwhelming their mitochondria, it's the guy who's running 50 miles, right? Like, not a week, 50 miles at a time. I think he sent a note recently, like he's clocking 30 miles a day and just doesn't even feel it. And what he says is, I don't believe that the ESS60 molecule speeds recovery, because if it sped recovery, like let's say it takes 11 days to recover and normally, and I take the product and I'm recovering in 5 days or 7 days or whatever. No, I believe the product prevents damage in the first place. And if you're being that buffer for those reactive oxygen species, which are some of the cause of the damage while you're in this stressed state, if you're managing that, then yeah, it would be preventing damage. And that's kind of Anthony's testimonial. I love him. He's goes to booths with us and posts regularly about his adventures in this kind of ultra running space and our product.
That's awesome. I've never really thought about it that way. That from a mechanistic standpoint, being preventative, in the first place. Now, there is some differences. So when you talked about the Worcester rat study, the Bati study, they had rats that took nothing, rats that were getting C60 in water, and then rats getting it in, I believe, olive oil, right?
Well, so there were 3 groups. The first group, the control group, was water. And then the next group was olive oil only. And then the next group was olive oil with the ESS60 molecule in it.
Okay. How C60 is prepared, what it's basically delivered in, makes a difference, right?
Absolutely. And since you mentioned kind of water and associate those, there are some people on the market who are actually selling a C60, a water-soluble C60. I would not put that in my body. That doesn't even have the minimum amount of toxicity studies. I think it might turn out okay in the future. But when you're talking about 0 toxicity studies on a new molecule, that is something that, like, I just wouldn't put it in my body. That doesn't seem like a smart strategy. I certainly wouldn't bring it to market without doing that bare minimum of toxicity studies. The reason that it's dissolved in olive oil in this original study, and our products are olive oil, avocado oil, and MCT oil, and we can talk about how olive oil's the better version, is because it turns out that the ESS60 molecule is not water soluble, right? So if you had a powder, a pile of it, it would be like a crystalline, like a salt or sugar crystals in your hand, and they're black crystals, and you can consume that. There's no problem. The thing is it's not water soluble, so you would just end up excreting it out, right? So it would just have a great journey through your intestines, and then it really wouldn't have much, if any, value. When you actually do make a solution with it, right? So you actually dissolve it in olive oil. And so now you've got the individual ESS60 molecules floating around in the olive oil, and its bioavailability is just tremendously increased. Just to note, it actually takes 3 weeks to get the ESS60 molecule to dissolve in either olive oil. It's actually more readily in MCT, but in olive oil and avocado oil, which is not nice to us as a manufacturer. Like, if I were to wake up and say, I want to make money with supplements, I wouldn't choose this, right? Because anything that takes 3 weeks to manufacture is inherently more challenging than something that you just mix it and it foams and now the product's ready. Like, that's a smarter path. We just never really intended in being in this space. And so, yeah, the best one is olive oil. And we say that for two reasons. First, we're a science-based organization and all the research is in the ESS60 molecule in olive oil. The next reason is because you get a higher concentration of the ESS60 molecule. You get about 0.8 milligrams per milliliter in olive oil, about 0.6 in avocado oil, and about 0.3 in MCT oil, which I love MCT oil. My routine is I actually have about a teaspoon and a half in my coffee every day. While that's blending, because it's oil and water, it's got to blend, kind of a bulletproof coffee kind of thing. While that's blending, I'll take a teaspoon and a half of our olive oil product.
Yeah, I think it's if somebody's looking at it and going, okay, I want the best payload for what I'm investing, get the olive oil base. You could take it as a teaspoon. You could put it on food if you wanted, but I wouldn't waste it and leave it residue in the bowl somewhere.
Not super expensive, but it's also not inexpensive, right? So you just, better to get it on a spoon and make sure you take the whole thing or, whatever methodology works. But yeah, I tend not to just flippantly put it on salads, although I have access to a lot. So
yeah, obviously, so we can ingest C60, right? So we can ingest it in oils and obviously get the benefit both, systemically and then cellularly, right? Now, obviously, there's a whole nother set of applications because oxidative stress, reactive oxygen species affect everything. So there's a beauty aspect to this too that I think for a lot of my women listeners might be interested in understanding.
Yeah. Well, one, I think, Menopause Mastery, we actually, and just to be 100% transparent, we basically took our regular bottle and put a menopause support label on it. And that was mostly driven by my wife, who went through early onset menopause. She's quite the influencer, actually, and she speaks about menopause in the Spanish space. The name is Mujeres Vivaces, which is like vivacious women. So she kind of drove that. She's like, hey, this is really helping me with the menopause symptoms that I'm experiencing. Put that label together because I want to present it to my audience. And if you think about, again, going back to the impact on the mitochondria, you mentioned cellular, and I'll do a subtle kind of correction because remember mitochondria, looking at a supplement, and if you're like, oh, this is amazing, it works at the cellular level. Well, actually, this works at the subcellular level, and that's pretty phenomenal. And we see head-to-toe testimonials. I'm going to throw in kind of the FDA disclaimer. The FDA has not evaluated our product. It is not intended to treat, diagnose, cure, or prevent any disease. And that's a requirement from the FDA. I actually think it's the right thing, right? This is an early molecule. This is kind of a beta product. Your doctors probably haven't heard of this. You might not have heard of this until this particular podcast. So we are talking cutting edge technology. When I talk about anecdotes, just from the transparency perspective, assume these anecdotes aren't going to happen for you. That's just a better assumption. Dig into the research. We can get you links to the papers. You can look at how they continue to do research on this molecule and it continues to show positive benefits. We're just sharing this as an example basis. So we have head to toe testimonials. We've got, early on, remember I was talking about that kind of 18 months where I didn't know what to do with testimonials. And, some of those testimonials would be, my hair is growing back. It's growing back where it hasn't grown. It's growing back original color, which is just fantastic. We actually have a lot of skin, hair, and nail improvements that have been reported, which actually I think makes sense from the perspective of hopefully your audience is probably aware that skin, hair, and nails, that's aesthetics, right? We need skin, but nails and hair are aesthetics. And if you're dealing with something internally, your body's going to put the resources to that internal thing. It's not going to worry about hair and nails. And as our customers were probably managing those internal things that their body was dealing with, then the hair and nails start to grow back. They start to grow in their more natural state. And so that's kind of our head testimonial. The toe testimonial is kind of interesting. It's nail related, but we have an influencer whose big toe was bitten by a crab and split his toe when he was 5 years old. So he's got the split toenail. He actually was a Navy SEAL with a split toenail. At 65, after he started taking our product, it healed finally, right? So 60 years with a split toe, and now it finally healed. So when I say we have head-to-toe testimonials, we literally have head-to-toe testimonials. And if you apply the impact that it has on mitochondria, the reduction of negative impact that an overwhelmed mitochondria would experience, then that kind of explains why we have these head-to-toe testimonials. Now, we ended up, I think this is maybe the direction you're going, I have a business partner who, as she would drink the product just right out of the bottle, there'd be a little bit on the edge. And so she would take it and she'd wipe it on her skin. And we were already getting great positive skin, hair, and nail improvement testimonials. And she came to us and she shared that we should do a face serum. Now, I don't think I've done a good enough job kind of describing how little I wanted to be in this space. So let me kind of roll back a little. The original study was published in mid-2012. In mid-2013, my business partner and I started getting phone calls, and we would get, 2-3 phone calls a week. And the initial phone calls were like, hey, how much of this should I be consuming? And Robert and I were conservative carbon nanomaterials. And we're like, wait a minute, you're asking me how much of this stuff that we sell to research institutions around the world to put into ink, batteries, tires, and photocells, you're asking us how much should you consume? The answer is probably zero, right? We actually added not for human consumption to our labeling in mid-2013. So if you kind of picture this, from 1991 when we started manufacturing all the way to mid-2013, we don't have not for human consumption on our labeling because nobody's thinking about consuming this stuff. We added there. And let me share, the literature was clear. It was safe. We're just conservative, slow-moving carbon nanomaterial scientists. And we continued to get 2 to 3 phone calls a week from mid-2013, really to the latter part of 2017. And my business partner and I would get together really like every quarter, like, hey, do we want to be in the supplement space? People understand the supplement space is challenge. There's challenges in the supplement space. It's a challenged industry. And in the middle of this time frame, I actually found a peer-reviewed published research paper that said 50% of the supplements they had purchased on the market did not have in them what they said they had in them, right? And that's so different than delivering commercial quantities of carbon nanomaterials. Like, we give it to a researcher, they give it to their grad student or their research associate. They have an HPLC, they go test it. They're like, yes, they shipped us what we bought from them. Like, this is the most stringent kind of environment you can imagine. And that's not how the supplement market is. Finally, at the latter part of 2017, a guy with a big YouTube following started talking about all the benefits he was getting taking it on a daily basis. And our phone went from ringing 2 to 3 times a week to 10 times a day. Then my business partner and I, we started asking a different question. Like, this is an entrepreneurial opportunity outside of which we understood before. And we asked ourselves 2 questions. The first question is a moral question. Are we comfortable selling this? I take it, my wife takes it, everybody on our team takes it. Not a requirement. You don't have to take the product to work here. But yeah, we're comfortable selling it. And then the FDA, you heard my disclaimer earlier, the FTC, you got to cross T's, you got to dot I's. And so it was really at the beginning of 2018, we started bringing this forward. So hopefully that kind of paints the picture. I didn't want to be in the supplement space. The business partner comes to us and says, we should do a face serum. And I'm like, yay, that sounds amazing. We should do a face. I've always wanted to do a face serum. And, part of it was that we were getting good testimonials already. Part of it was you want to support a business partner, right? Like, that makes sense. It's smart to have additional products out there. So then we put this face serum out on the market, and the testimonials were just right off the bat, absolutely amazing. Within days, people were saying like, this is amazing. I have this one lady, she's an influencer and a distributor of ours. Our first phone call was kind of funny because she was like, Chris, I have to share with you. Her name's Sarah Banta. I have to share with you. I have a face serum and skin lotion obsession. I actually have a credit card that my husband doesn't know about, so I can buy face serums and skin lotions. And your stuff, the original stuff, the oral stuff, is the best thing that I've ever put on my face. And we're like, well, that's amazing. You should try this. And then about the time we were coming out with the face serum, my director of research came to me and said, hey, I've got this molecule that's got 30 years of skin and hair improvements, and it's peer-reviewed published research. We should look into it. I looked at it. It's a peptide, which is a water-soluble version, which is a water-soluble molecule. And so we put that. I wanted to use both. And you can actually put water-soluble and oil-soluble things together with what's called an emulsifier.
Yeah.
But I don't even like how emulsifier, it doesn't sound healthy. And if you go Google it, there is nothing healthy about emulsifiers. It's mostly negative. So we kept them separate. So it's called Skin Reduo, and we got a peptide. We call it UTH29, so Youth 29. And then we've got the ESS60 activator. And you actually, for every squirt of this peptide lotion, you add 2 drops of the activator. and you activate it right there in your hand. And we're also getting amazing testimonials about that because you've got these two kind of very powerful molecules, the UTH29 peptide and the ESS60 molecule kind of working in concert.
Wow. That's, because the reality is whether we love it or hate it, we also care about how we look. Right? Now, I want to go back because your wife, like you said, so for everybody, we met at a conference and we actually met at the pool party at the end of the conference. And actually, I got to meet his wife and another friend of mine, and we actually did a menopause hot flash dance for everybody. The reality is women could go into menopause at any given time, right? It could be mid-30s, which your wife, I think, went into mid to late 30s. I went into menopause late 30s, and that we get to enjoy the adventure. But, the research today is really showing that our ovarian aging is accelerated relative to the rest of the body. Right. So our reproductive organs, the clock is more narrowly focused and also way more damaged. The organ itself is way more damaged by aging, inflammation, probably oxidative stress, those same things. So it stands to reason that if we are putting a molecule in the body that improves this antioxidant effect and the reactive oxygen species, that it could have this modulating effect. This is me hypothesizing as a researcher, that it could have this modulating effect on an organ that's showing aging at an accelerated rate. All these secondary mechanisms, which is kind of cool, right?
And I think that if you think from an evolutionary perspective, if we're fighting something, right, and nowadays it could be the stress of that last phone call, right? I mean, it came up with a phrase, we're running from perpetual lions, but there's like all our body knows is like everything's good or 5-alarm fire or 6-alarm, or whatever the big number of fires is. And so when we get off that phone with that stressful call or with our significant other or with our children, I have 14-year-old twins. There's a lot of stress there. Our bodies are in this fight or flight mode. In that mode, it doesn't make sense to have a child, right? Like you're under stress, the lion's chasing you or they're constantly around your camp or whatever. So yeah, that organ is going to be less used. Like it just makes perfect sense. And then if you start addressing that, right? Like what does this stress do to us? We can't really talk about the kind of chronic inflammation that cause, right? I can't address that yet. We need to do more research, but we can talk about the inflammation and the overwhelmed mitochondria and the fact that this will manage the negative byproduct that's coming out of that. And I can share, this is very anecdotal. Again, assume this doesn't happen for you. But one of our influencers, she hadn't had her period in a number of years, and it came back when she started taking the product, right? By the way, my director of research is a former practicing gynecologist, and his first reaction is like, that's not good, right? When it returned, that's typically signs of not good things. And I don't know about your experience, like, maybe if you're just getting people into a healthier state, but from the gynecologist's perspective, that's not really supposed to happen. And she's perfectly healthy, perfectly happy. I don't know the status of her periods anymore. We haven't had a conversation about that in quite some time. Yes, I believe that there is positive impact on female hormones and the uterus and really just what is driving the hormones in your body.
I would say from a bleeding standpoint, obviously I'm not a gynecologist, but you have ovarian, what we would call premature ovarian failure, or, basically the egg carton is missing, right? Yeah. There's no more eggs left in the carton. And that usually drives, the loss of your period. Basically, the pituitary goes, hey, nothing's working anymore. We're done. Yeah. But if somebody has period cessation because of, potentially maybe, because we know, here's an example. Athletes in particular, female athletes, particularly younger ones, will lose their period partially because of loss of body fat. And that's a safety mechanism. The body says, okay, I've got enough body fat to raise a fetus. It also produces estrogen. But there's also an oxidative damage effect that's probably happening at the same time that really hasn't been explored. We know that those athletes get, the trifecta. We see more bone injuries and other things. But could somebody conceivably restore, oxidative damage to their ovaries and see a period return as part of a normal physiology? Yes. Now, abnormal bleeding where you haven't bled for 5 years and it's like, okay, now you just start. It warrants looking to see because that can be a sign of other things like hyperplasia. But, there are even gynecologists out there that sort of are promoting the idea of cycling hormones to kind of mimic cycling so we can continue to cycle into our 60s and 70s. I'm not of that camp because I haven't seen any research saying that. I think the important thing that everybody needs to know is that C60 is a powerful molecule when it's delivered in an oil. And specifically, you can have it in MCT and avocado, but olive oil is the most bang for your buck. And then it should be something that we're integrating into our normal, supplemental process, because it has this positive effect all the way to the subcellular level. Now, how can people find you, Chris? How can they find your products and everything else?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I am currently working on growing my Instagram so people could absolutely do me a teeny tiny favor and look up MyVitalC. So altogether, MyVitalC, C as in carbon, on Instagram and TikTok or whatever. I'm on all the things, right? You are also on an episode of my podcast, so go check out. That is called Live Beyond the Norms, and you can actually find that at livebeyondthenorms.com. And then I made a special link for your audience. If somebody's interested in trying the product, like maybe they dive into the research a little bit and they're like, yeah, let me go try it. If they go to myvitalc.com/menopause mastery, they'll be taken to a special page, or your podcast logo will be there so they'll know that they're at the right page. And we also have a $15 off coupon code. You can find it on that page. So you got to go to myvitalc.com/menopause mastery. And when you're there, we do this kind of nice thing. You can find the bottle. Again, if you just want to try it, I recommend the olive oil. If you are somebody who doesn't like olive oil, we actually do have gel caps. Just know that the typical serving is about a teaspoon. When you try and get a teaspoon of oil into gel caps, like the gel caps aren't small, but they're not huge, but it does take 6 of them, right? So I don't want anybody thinking, oh, I'm just going to take one. We recommend like 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, and that'll be good for you. So we do have that option. And we also provide like a 25% discount on subscription. So even if you just want to take one, go ahead and take advantage of that subscription. A lot of people stay on subscription, you might imagine. You can cancel at any time. You can cancel via email. You cancel by calling us. Our customer service team has like 850, it's probably more like 900 5-star reviews. They are not trained to talk you out of canceling your subscription. They're trained to help you, and they're actually very knowledgeable. So if you even have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. But remember, myvitalc.com/menopause mastery.
Cool. Well, everybody check out Chris and support him, and obviously his podcast as well. And I thank you guys for listening to Menopause Mastery. If this was a helpful episode for you, please share it with a friend, and we will be back next week. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Menopause Mastery podcast. You are why I'm here, and I am so very grateful. Hit subscribe so you don't miss any wisdom on creating the most exceptional life on our terms. If this episode has helped you in any way, please share it with a friend to spread the love, and together we rise. You can follow me on social media at Betty Murray, PhD, and you can reach me online at bettymurray.com.